Hello, this is Book Circle Presents and Join the Circus. Gus and Doug have come home, learned to take human shape. Now they're trying to figure out what to do with themselves. And for that purpose, they're going to visit Professor Rook. The next day, they sat in a little office several blocks from Chicago's Loop, well below that neighborhood's standards. The office was a 3-floor walk-up and featured creaky wooden floors, a lack of rugs or upholstery, and a general air of dating from the 1930s. The only new thing in the office was the sign on the frosted glass of the door, which read, "Windy City Fantasy Circus." The walls were blank, no circus posters or other memorabilia. Doug and Gus sat on bare wooden chairs before a wooden desk. On the desk sat the only welcoming touch, a teapot, a couple of cups, and a plate of cookies next to a small chessboard. Behind the desk sat, on 2 more bare wooden chairs, Professor Rook and the amazing Madame Theano. The young men sat, each enveloped in his camo gi, overlarge on their now human frames. A gym bag sat on the floor beside each, holding the street clothes they had arrived in. Professor Rook looked about 50, though extra gray of hair. He was thin and sharp-faced, just now in slacks and sports shirt. Madame Theano was equally uncostumed, in a loose sweater and slacks. She was a head shorter, a little plump, with olive skin and lustrous dark eyes. Though not Asian, she looked like Doug's mom, Gus said later. Gus denied it. 30 seconds earlier, Doug had knocked on the door and told the surprised Rook, "We heard you were hiring." Rook, his face a careful blank, had invited them to come in and sit. "And where did you hear we were hiring?" he asked. "Professor Greathouse told us." Rook and Theano traded glances. "That is not quite right," said Rook. "We are willing to hire. We haven't been looking. Go on." Before they could, Theano asked, "What do you know about us?" "Your circus is a cover," Doug answered. "You're a traveling company of talents." "You go around doing good," Gus added. "Mainly you're monster hunters." Rook raised his eyebrows and looked annoyed. Greathouse is usually very discreet. She must have had a good reason for being so free with her information. "What are you offering?" Theano asked. She looked at their clothes. "Martial arts?" "That's part of the package," Gus answered. "But, well..." Doug caught his eye, and together they stood. Then, together, much more quickly than in Mateo's bedroom, between systole and diastole, they changed. "Who better to help you hunt monsters," asked Doug, "than your own monsters?" Rook and Theano had both jumped in their seats and now sat staring. Rook rose and walked around the two, inspecting. "That wasn't in the numbers," Theano remarked. "Or in play," Rook replied. "But we never see all of it." "What are you?" he asked them. "We're Fays," said Doug, still feeling odd about the label. "But we're new at it," added Gus. 5 years ago we were regular guys, soldiers, but we got taken and changed." "Fey marked, the Grand Normans call it," Doug added, "as well as shape-shifted. We were made to serve as soldier slaves along with more than 20 other guys, but our captor died, was slain, and we escaped. We got back just a few months ago." "The Grand Normans helped us," said Gus. "You know about them?" Theano and Rook nodded. "They got us glamours and shipped us home. Then we found Hengist. He's a Kurdian at the Field Museum. You know him?" Again they nodded. "He pointed us to Greathouse, and she taught us to shift back to our original shapes." "How?" added Rook. "She's no Fey." After a moment's thought, "Is she?" "No," said Doug, "but she's a shaman, isn't she? They can shapeshift their astral bodies, and she's a good teacher." Theano rose and took her turn circling them. "You called us a collection of talents," she said. "What are your talents?" Well, this is the big one, said Doug, spreading his arms and looking down at himself. This way we're strong and tough and fast, and we can see in the dark and hear and feel our way like cats. Of course, it's a great disguise. It scares the willies out of people. For other magic, we can feel spells and push and pull the energy, but that's about it. But we have our soldier skills. We can fight with rifle, pistol, sword, bow, hand-to-hand, ride a little. The Grand Normans taught us that. Wilderness survival, first aid, camp cooking, hunting, so we can at least be handymen. What do you call them? Roustabouts? Theano and Rook tried to take in the rapid-fire resume. Though Gus's voice was a husky tenor and Doug's was a clear baritone, it was hard to keep track of who had said what. They stood contemplating the pair for a few seconds after they had run down. Then, "Sing something, please," Theano said. "What?" asked Doug. "I'm a Pythagorean," she explained. "My magic runs on numbers and music." "You don't want to hear me sing," said Gus with a self-deprecating grin that incidentally gave Theano and Rook a first look at his teeth. "No, I do," she insisted. "I can tell a lot about you if you sing, so please." Doug and Gus traded glances and shrugs, and then, without further preparation, sang, a soul cake, please, good mistress, a soul cake, an apple, a pear, a plum, or a cherry, any good thing to make us all merry. A soul cake, please, good mistress, a soul cake, 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for him who made us all. God bless the master of this house, and the mistress also, and all. Theano raised her hand to stop them. Thank you. She was staring at them almost as intently as when they had turned into catmen. She backed up a pace, bumped into the desk, picked up 2 cookies, and handed 1 to each of them. Then she seized Rook by the elbow, told the two, "We need to confer privately," and steered him through a door into a room lined with old wooden filing cabinets. Gus and Doug looked at each other. "We scared her," Doug said. "My singing's not that bad," said Gus. "She didn't bolt when we went cat. What gives?" Doug shrugged and started to nibble the cookie. In the other room, Theano murmured to Rook in a tense undertone, 2 entry-level fays walk into our office, turn into monsters, and start singing about souls. What do you make of them?" "And you gave them their soul cakes," Rook noted. "Damn right I did. That shapeshift. I've never seen magic that showy, that heavy-duty. And neither of you. Even the Looper's wind play and levitation doesn't match it. And there's the delicate part, too. The way they picked that song out of the air together. Whatever we do with them, even if it's nothing, will have consequences. What do you make of them?" she asked again. Instead of answering directly, he mused. This being his habit, she waited and listened. "They look Leo, but they're really Gemini and human, quite human. I felt for that when they changed. They still felt quite human. That fits their tale. Children of opposite sides of the world, born here on the 3rd side, then made into elves." "Elves? They're sphinxes, dragons, ifrits." In her excitement, she unconsciously let her voice rise. "No, that's just the shape," Rook replied, his voice also rising to a normal volume. Outside, Gus cocked an ear. As he had openly told them minutes ago, his cat ears had excellent hearing. So had Doug's. "Are those 2 telling the truth?" Theano asked. "I thought they were." "I thought so, too. So, we've met fays. We've met some who used to be human ghosts. We've heard of living mortals being fey-marked, but this is the first time we've met any so fresh. Turned only 5 years ago, not 500 or anything like that." Theano watched his face as his eyes gleamed. "We hire them," he announced. "Why?" asked Theano. "I can see you want to, but why?" "They weren't on our radar. I drew the pieces and the cards this morning. You spotted counts and germinals. Nothing big or imminent. but we looked for coming bad news. Some big bad might be hiding, and it might be them, or we could both have fumbled it this morning, but likelier things are as they seem, so far as we've looked. We've only checked the bad side, and they weren't there. All right, I'm sure you're right. This is consequential. They're Fays now, Fata, people of fate. His eyes gleamed. Think of the opportunity. Outside, Doug and Gus looked at each other. What do you mean, Chessmaster? I mean, yes, spectacular magic, but only the one trick, though it's a good one. Apart from that, they're just big, strong, willing young men. And it's one trick now. But they're at the beginning of their Fey lives. If we help them, get them off to a good start, think where they could be in 100 years. Like Huon, Skirmir, Glorfindel, the Dagda. We help them, and the other way around, of course, but the circus won't last forever. They will. Outside, Gus's shoulders slumped. Doug clapped him on the one nearest. So it's said, Theano replied. Well, I admit that having our own pair of elven knights on the staff, outside both Doug and Gus sat up straighter, could be great, but can we first ask them why they want to join up? That's sense, yes. Theano and Rook returned to the office where Doug and Gus, now seated, still catmen, met their eyes. We didn't mean to eavesdrop, said Doug, but our ears are very good this way. He twitched his demonstratively. Theano raised her eyebrows and said, I see. Well then, why do you want to join our circus? Doug had worked this out beforehand with some edits from Gus. We've just come back to the mortal world after 5 years' absence. We've been through some really weird stuff and have been made really weird. Our families are delighted to have us back, but everything's changed, especially us. We're trying to figure out what to do with ourselves. It makes no sense to try to go back to an ordinary life. And, he raised one clawed finger, and we seem to be attracting weirdness. You know the Sundering? You know the name? We learned it from the Grand Normans. Rook nodded. The way luck hides magic. Yes, most English speakers call it that. Right. So, if you're magic, you're sundered. And our coming home means our families are sundered too now. So they can run into magic and weirdness. And we seem to be attracting attention. Like the sundered things are sniffing around to see who the new boys in town are. Don't know. But we seem to be drawing animals and ghosts to us, and to our families and neighbors. Not all nice ones either, Gus put in. The ghosts, the animals are just a little too interested so far. So we figure we need to travel, not settle, to protect our families and anyone else we stayed with. But going back to the first part, what do we do with ourselves now? The Grand Normans had some suggestions, but mainly they said, be good fairies. So joining a traveling band of monster hunters seemed like a good fit. Oh, I agree, said Rook, a light like greed in his eyes. As you know, if you heard us. Why'd you call us elven knights? Gus asked Theano. That's what the Grand Normans called us, and I want to live up to that, but we don't look like elves. He swept his hand down to his clawed feet and swaying tail. Do they? Asked Theano. I must have picked it up. But then they and I both see young warriors bent on doing good, and you're elves. Well, fays that look human most of the time. Isn't that an elf? So, elven knights. I think it's an excellent match, declared Rook. After all, as you know, we too are wandering about on errantry, doing good as best we can. I'd be very pleased for you to join forces with us. The two looked over the other two for some seconds. Their enthusiasm seemed to shrink as Rook's grew. Could you tell us a little more about yourselves, please? Doug asked. You know our tricks. What are yours? Greathouse didn't tell us any more about you than we've repeated. Rook and Theano nodded and resumed their seats behind the desk. Well, said Rook, for a start, Madame Theano and Professor Rook are stage names. We are really Irma and Dennis Vogel. I'm just a chess mage, really. And I'm just a Pythagorean, said Theano. She studied their puzzled expressions. That's number magic with a side order of music magic. They nodded. But why do you say just a chess mage and Pythagorean? Doug asked. We're not any kind of mages, Gus put in. Rook smiled at him. You don't need to be. If a mage is an electrician, you are a lightning bolt. He expected a pleased reaction, even if mixed with embarrassment. Instead, Doug looked at the monster hands in his lap and said, I see. Gus did look embarrassed, but not pleased. We didn't mean to show off, he muttered. Well, we did, but that's what you do on a job interview, isn't it? To be sure, said Rook. Don't apologize for your power. We're just explaining that we don't have much. Pythagoreans, Theano said, are the accountants of the magic world, so to speak. Mostly we know things. No fireballs, not even rabbits out of hats. I do the rabbits out of hats, said Rook, but that's just stage magic. That's my act in the circus. But there's not a lot of magic to be got out of chess. I, too, mostly just know things. That's hardly an insignificant power, Doug retorted. Gus and I and 25 other guys spent 5 years desperately wanting to know things, mostly what had happened to us and what we were now. And just last night, said Gus, I was telling a scared little boy that the winner is the guy who knows the most. So you use your magic to track the bad guys, to know where to go next? You make it sound so simple, sighed Theano, but basically, yes. So is that enough to start with? And somehow I think this connects. Please tell us about that little boy. Gus and Doug told them about Matteo and his parents. There, said Theano, smiling warmly, you're already doing the same work. Rook smiled too, but with an edge. And somehow we have gone from you asking us for us asking you to work for us. An elegant gambit. So what do you say? Please come work with us, urged Theano. Then she watched as both nodded slowly without looking at each other. Okay, said Doug, it is what we came here to do. Gus leaned over and engulfed Rook's hand in his own, shaking it. Doug did likewise with Theano. A few minutes later, back in street clothes and human forms, Gus and Doug were descending the stairs of the 4th floor walk-up. They came on a little strong there at the end, didn't they? Doug remarked. Yeah, I think I know why it bothered us so much. Why? Asked Doug, not the least surprised that Gus knew it had bothered them both. Last time someone was that eager to acquire us, we woke up with scales and tails. Good point. Nevertheless, 2 days later, goodbyes all said, Gus and Doug were sitting in the back of an elderly Volvo station wagon being driven to the Indiana Dunes National Park, just east of Gary, where the Windy City Fantasy Circus was presently parked. My family used to come out here sometimes when I was a kid, Gus muttered, looking at the oak and pine rising out of the sandy soil. Mine too, said Doug. I wonder if we were ever here on the same day before we met. Then, in a lilting tongue, Olthanima oi erid medwi fuin, Karim. Did you dream about the mountains last night? I did. They had been enslaved in mountainous country. Gus nodded. Thuin Aderen dan Gondran, Barath, Bayan dan Ring, Sendelog, Dar Barbe. Pine and oak, but stone, steep, beautiful but cold. This is warmer, homier. Doug nodded back. May I ask what language you're speaking? Said Rook from the driver's seat. Sindarin, Doug answered, and said no more. They had, after all, picked that language for privacy. So Rook asked nothing more. The circus was tucked away in a large parking lot surrounded by trees, perpetually in danger of being sunk in sand. Perhaps the dunes were warmer than the mountains, but they were not, in literality, very warm. It was autumn, and the oaks had all turned brown. The wind made the lake roar a few hundred yards away. The circus was presently packed into several trucks and RVs bearing the name in swirling letters of purple and orange. Rook parked the Volvo among the larger vehicles, and the riders got out. Rook and Theano wore light jackets, but Gus and Doug wore only their camo gi. They would probably have to demonstrate their shape-shifting several times today. "No tents?" Gus asked. Rook waved at the trucks. "All packed away, some little ones, no big top. We perform outside as much as we can, so—" "Dogs!" exclaimed Doug. Half a dozen miniature poodles, 2 standard poodles, 2 golden retrievers, and 2 German Shepherd mixes came charging out from among the vehicles to greet Theano and Rook, to inspect the newcomers, to practice barking, to blow off steam, or whatever. Rook had deliberately refrained from telling Gus and Doug much about the circus staff, or vice versa, exactly so he could see their spontaneous reactions. However, he had worried how sometime catmen would react to dogs. He need not have. Doug and Gus crouched down and spread their arms, grinning, to receive incoming. After they underwent an intense few seconds of sniffing and licking, they were rescued by a lean man in boots and a bill cap who strolled up and commanded, "To me, stay." In a moment it was so, and all was silent. Still crouching, Gus and Doug stared up at the man from very much the same perspective as any of the larger dogs. "These the new guys?" asked the man. Rook assured him they were, then said, "This is Christopher Johns and his pack. Dog acts, of course. Beyond that, on what you call the weird side of the street, he can get them to do some amazing things in his sleep." Gus cocked his head and said, "Ben Andante? Wolf shaman?" Johns nodded silently. "We met some among the Grand Normans." He rose to shake hands. "August Weisskopf. Call me Gus." Johns nodded. Doug rose and shook hands too. "Douglas Shengming Chiang. Doug." Another silent nod. After a couple of seconds' inspection, Johns asked them, "What do you do?" He nodded at Rook and Theano. They only said 2 new guys. This had been discussed. The circus masters were letting Gus and Doug introduce themselves in the manner they chose. They chose openness. "Well, just roustabouts to start with," said Doug, "but we were thinking demonstration sword fights and like that." "And there's this," added Gus. He and Doug took a pace back, looked at the obediently seated dogs, and changed. They took it slowly, a couple of seconds. There were a few soft growls and whines, but no one broke ranks. Neither did Johns, though his eyes were wide and he'd taken a step back. Gus gestured at the dogs and asked, "Can we make friends again?" Johns blinked, nodded, said, "Good idea." Then to the dogs, "Say hi." Quietly, more slowly and subdued, the dogs came around to investigate. Doug and Gus crouched down again and extended reformed hands. "It's me. It's still me," Doug promised. "I'm still okay." "Me too," said Gus. "I like dogs, and not with gravy." Johns told them later that probably it was the sudden increase in height that took the dogs aback. But Doug and Gus smelled the same and sounded the same. The body language was the same, even if the bodies weren't. And the boss regularly came to them in their dreams in the form of a wolf. So this was not too big a stretch. Most of all, the boss himself was okay with it. So soon, someone in the back yipped for their share of attention, and soon the barking and nuzzling were back in full force. After a couple of minutes, Johns summoned the dogs again and said, "They'll soak that up by the hour if you let 'em. Time for lessons. Time to let you get away." Doug and Gus scratched a few more ears as they rose, then turned away. The dogs did not even notice. And we'll meet more of the people of the fantasy circus next time.